We thank you, everyone, for being with us today. Happy Hanukkah, first day of Hanukkah today. And in the Christian world, we are moving into Advent, preparing for the Christmas holiday. We're going to be talking more about that in coming weeks. But for today, what came to me last night as I kind of sit and let ideas come to me was the song from the movie Midnight Cowboy back in the 70s. Midnight Cowboy was very popular. I was still living in New York at the time. And if you remember the theme song, it was Looking for Love in All the Wrong Places was one of the songs from the movie. Looking for love in all the wrong places. Looking for love in too many faces. And I kind of chuckle because that almost describes the human experience about everything. You know, we're looking for something. We don't know exactly what it is, yet we must look, and we're looking in the wrong places. We're looking where we won't find it. Rumi gives us the the parable of the drunk who's on his hands and knees in the street underneath the streetlight, and he's feeling around in the dirt. And a policeman comes by and says to him, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm looking for my keys. I dropped my keys." And the policeman says, "Well, where were you when you dropped them?" And the man points to the house, and he says, "I was over by the door there." And the policeman says, "Well, if you dropped your keys by the door, why are you looking for them here in the street?" And the drunk replied, "Well, the light is better here." Looking in all the wrong places. Looking in places that even makes no sense to be looking in places where we know better. We know we're not going to find it there, but yet we tend to keep looking. We tend to keep looking. So that's what we want to talk about today, and this is why the opening treatment was about divine guidance, because there's a part of us that already knows. But we have to look to it. We have to turn to that part of us that knows and stop looking in other places. That's kind of interesting. The human experience, if you stop and think about we as human beings, remember last week I talked about it. Desmond Morris said, you know, if you looked at us as you would look at any other animal, a zoologist would say, well, we must be some species of ape, you know. But there's something there, there's something different. There's something unique about the human being. And we discussed a little bit what that was. And I think one of the things that we have, and other creatures have it as well, but one of the things that I think causes us to grow and keeps us moving and keeps us living is curiosity. Curiosity, you know. We have these inquiring minds. We want to know. We want to explore. We want to look at everything. We want to look everywhere. You know, I mean, just look at from a physical point of view, the earth sciences point of view, what human beings are doing. You know, we have mapped probably every part of the Earth's surface, either through somebody having been there or through satellites taking images. You know, every part of the Earth's surface is pretty much known now. You can go on to the internet and you can look up pictures of places that you and I will never ever get to in our lives, and you can look at a satellite view and you can look down and see what that place looks like. You know. Many places have street views, and you can go and you can look at the streets. I was doing genealogy a year or so ago and found the town where some of my ancestors came from in Ireland, and was able to go onto the maps and to look at the main street and to imagine, you know, how much different might it be today than it was in the early 1900s, the late 1890s, early 1900s when they lived there. It's amazing what our curiosity, we want to know. We want to know what that's like. We want to travel. We want to go places, or we want to read, or we want to watch travel logs. If you look at the ocean, we have sent our probes, and we have sent the little submarines down into the depths of the ocean and explored the deepest parts of the ocean. I used to love. Remember when Jacques Cousteau had his TV show, and he would be on there, and every week they would get on Calypso and go somewhere and go under the water and take a look. And before that, when I was a little guy, there was a TV show on called Adventures in Paradise, and it was about a captain who had a sailing schooner in the South Pacific, like a three-masted schooner, an 80-foot sailboat or something like that. And he just used to sail from island to island and deliver cargo. And of course it was a TV show, so every week there was some kind of drama, some kind of problem to solve, and they would solve it by the end of the show. But this idea of just getting in a boat and sailing, and there was another travel log, Bill Burrid, I think, Burrid maybe. And he would go to these exotic places with his cameras, And it's like, we want to know. We're curious. We're looking for something. From the time we're born, we're looking for something. We just want to know. Little children, when they get between 2 and 4 maybe, and they just start asking why. What is this? What is that? Why? Why does this work? Why is the sky blue? And all these things. And it's insatiable. Their appetite for knowledge is just insatiable. They just can't get enough, And I remember Fenwick Holmes wrote a biography of his brother Ernest. And Fenwick said that when Ernest was a young man, a little boy growing up, his mother called him the little question mark, because he always wanted to know. He always had to ask. He was always constantly exploring. And I remember a few years ago, I was in a grocery store, and a young mom came in, and she had a little guy. He might have been maybe 3, not quite 4. And she put him in the grocery cart in that little seat. And from the time they walked in the door, he was just chattering. Mommy, what's this? Mommy, what's that? Mommy this, Mommy that. And she was so kind and so patient with him, and she just answered all of his questions, And they got to the produce aisle, and he's pointing at the different fruits, and he's saying, "What's this? What's that?" And he pointed to an orange, and she said to him, "That's an orange." And he said, "An orange?" Like he's trying to understand. And she said, "Yes, it's a fruit. You've had orange." And he's kind of like trying to remember. And she said, "Well, why don't we get one and we'll take it home and you can try it." And he's smiling a big smile and nodding his head, and she picks out a beautiful orange, and gives it to him to hold. And he holds it up, and he's orange. He's learned something new. He's just so excited. And it just impressed me, to see that, to be able to observe that, and to see that kind of a special moment of this little soul that was here and was curious, was oh so curious, and how loving his mommy was, just patiently answering his questions, And I know sometimes the questions can get on our nerves, but she was just so patiently answering his questions and going around the store and getting what she wanted. And of course, from time to time, as you go through the store, the people you come in with, you cross paths several times. It's like we're programmed to search. We're looking for something, but we're not entirely sure what it is that we're looking for. And we're not entirely sure where to look. What is it that we're looking for? Where should we be looking, Are we like the drunk out in the road, crawling under the streetlight, looking for something that's in a distant place? Do we even know? And that's what struck me about looking for love in all the wrong places, looking for love. I think love is what we are looking for, but it's not the ordinary definitions of love that we experience in this world. So our society has kind of, our culture, our books, our arts, everything has kind of painted all of these different images of what love is or what love ought to be, and it's, we're caught up in romance, we're caught up in duties and responsibilities and love for our country, we're caught up in physical love, we're caught up in all of these things, and of course the TV really pushes that, trying to sell us something. But I think if we stop and ask ourselves what love really is, if that is what we are looking for, what love really is, then perhaps we can find a better place to look and a better way to look for that which is causing us to seek. Dr. Holmes tells us that what we are looking at, we are looking with. And what we are seeking is seeking itself through us. Augustine put it a different way. He said that we would not have the desire to pray if God had not first put it in our hearts. So it's as if we are here on this earth in this experience of time and space, but there is something within us that is causing us to look for it. And when we find it, with a capital I, it is the experience of true love, agape love, unconditional love, the love of God, the love of a Buddha, the love of a Christ, perfect love. And this perfect love that I'm talking about is the experience of oneness, the experience of unity. Ernest Holmes says, I am not my brother's keeper. I am my brother. I am my brother. Joseph Campbell, in some of his work, he was talking about the act of love in the sacrifice that a soldier might make on the battlefield, where the soldier would step in front of danger and be killed rather than to see a comrade killed, a buddy killed. And Campbell says this laying down of our life for another is the greatest act of love, because in that moment the sense of otherness was gone. The other was no less important than the self. The self was no less important than the other. The person acted out of this sense of deep connectedness, deep unity, deep love, deep love. So this experience of love that we are, I believe, is what we are looking for. We're looking for it. Our curiosity is kind of an outpicturing of this desire to seek. Maybe I just can say it that simply. We are born with a desire to seek. Yet what we're seeking and where we are seeking it is something that we have to work out along the way. It is something that we have to figure out as we progress, as we move through life. And we have no shortage of distractions in the world. We have no shortage of people who will tell us what we ought to be looking for and how we ought to look, and basically projecting their ideas onto us. And at times will tell us not to look anywhere else except where they tell us to look, because if we do, we could be confused, or we could We could be in trouble. We could be punished. We have book burnings in our history. We have, modern day equivalent of boycotts and people trying to get streams of thought shut down that they don't agree with. We have all of these things which, if you look at the difference between what we would call spirituality and religion, religion is in many cases about dogma and creed. There is a way, it is our way, and observe our way, and don't go anyplace else. Don't look anywhere else. Now, spirituality is different. Most religions are based or founded upon someone's spiritual experience, an experience of the presence, or a mystical experience, if we want to say that. Cosmic consciousness is what Richard Maurice Buck would call it in his book by the same title. Stop and think about the world religions, and somebody somewhere had this extraordinary experience, and then a religion kind of built up around that. And in many cases over the years, the religion kind of lost sight of that original experience, what it was about. We as human beings have become more enamored with the teaching and the knowing and the intellectual than the actual experience. Right? So spirituality is about having our own experience. Religion is largely reading about and studying about and teaching and reiterating somebody else's experience. It's about dogma, it's about creed, and in many cases restrictive. I remember as a small child, when I was going to school, there were two churches in town, and the other church was having a bake sale. And we were told as children that we could not go to that other church to the bake sale because we would be entering a church that was wrong. They didn't teach the right things. That's what we were told as children, that this would be a sin to go and do this. So religion, when it gets wrapped up tight in dogma and creed, kind of stifles our curiosity. Tells us not to look. Tells us don't be confused. You have everything that you need right here in this dogma, in this creed. Same thing sort of happens when we go to school. You know, this little guy in the grocery cart asking his mom all these questions as they were going around, as spontaneously they occurred to him. You know, what is this? What is that? He was learning. He was learning in real time. He was learning by interacting with the world. He was learning by interacting with his mommy. As something came up, he asked and it was answered. And then, of course, what happens when we get into school, we don't have the ability in the school structures that we have today, most of them, to deal with teaching each child in a group spontaneously like that. So school then becomes about control and about form and about order. And we'll give you the book to read, and we'll tell you what questions you need to consider, and then you'll tell us the answers that we want. You know, that's what we learn. The teachers call it the banking system of education. Right? The teacher has all the information, the students have none. The teacher makes deposits of knowledge into the students. And to some degree, our creativity and our curiosity is stifled, you know. We can't ask questions when we want to ask them. We can't get the thing that pops up spontaneously for us to ask. We have to learn to wait, and we forget. We never get back to it. If you look back at the children, if you look at the children playing, they're also very creative, very creative, very, very expressive. Doesn't take much. They want to know. They want to know this. They want to know that. And then they create a fantasy world where they can live out these ideas. They can mold them. They can manipulate them. They can play with them. So maybe they learn a little bit about rocket ships, and then they get a cardboard box. And now this little cardboard box, that your stuff came in, that's their rocket ship. And I remember when our kids were little, and they would just play for hours with hardly anything. A box and a ray gun, a toy ray gun, from the dollar store and things like that. But their little minds were growing. Their little minds were expanding. They were kind of exploring the world, but they were exploring it in ideas. They were exploring it in their heads. And that seems to get shut down about the time that we go to school. We get busy. We have to do things. We have to study, and we have to pass a test. We have to learn the answers that are going to be on the test. We have to apply ourselves. And then we go home and we do homework. And our curiosity, our desire to seek, our desire to create, our desire to express something new and different and wonderful, simply for the joy of doing it. Ask the little ones, why are you doing that? Why are you spending so many hours doing that? Oh, we're having fun. We're having fun. We kind of lose that magic. As we go into the ways of the world. And we have to remember, I am in this world, but I am not of this world. So we have these great misdirections, I would call them misdirections. If you go to a magic show and you watch the magician, one of the things that the magicians learn to do is how to misdirect the audience's attention. And to me, I love watching the close-up magicians. Sometimes they have them on TV, and all you can see is their hands, and maybe they've got 3 or 4 cards, it looks like, in front of them, or a couple coins or something, and they're moving things around, and either something disappears or something appears, one way or the other, or it disappears and then it reappears someplace else. And the whole time it was right there in front of you, And you're looking very, very hard. You're straining your eyes. You say, I'm not going to be fooled this time, I know that queen is in the middle there, if they're doing 3-card Monte. And they fool you every time. Because something that they're doing is causing you to look in the wrong place. It is a misdirection. And they understand that. The magicians understand that. They're trained in that. And they know how to get you to look in the wrong place so that you won't see them doing the very thing that you're trying very hard to catch them doing. During the Second World War in England, a man who was a very, very popular stage magician went into the service. And he went into, I guess you would call it a camouflage unit. And he helped to use the things that he learned as a stage magician to completely fool the enemies. He was in northern Africa, and was responsible for eventually the defeat of Rommel there, because they completely fooled Rommel as to where the British tanks were. And he did it all. He hit plywood on pickup trucks, and they were moving around. It looked like tanks from a distance moving. It was just pickup trucks. So my point with that is that if we are misdirected, if we don't know what we're looking for, and we follow the misdirection, then we are looking in the wrong place. We are looking in the wrong place. So I'm going to come back to this idea of spirituality versus religion, which are not necessarily incompatible ideas, but they have kind of evolved that way in our culture, largely because the human intellect and the human ego get involved with organizations, and after a while, the organization's purpose is to survive, and kind of the essence of what the teaching was about gets lost somewhere. But spirituality, Dr. Holmes does a beautiful job in talking about spirituality and what it is for us and why it is important for us and how it grows within us, how our awareness of it grows. And I think that's important. We're never going to be more spiritual than we are right now. We will just be more aware of what it means to be spiritual than we are right now. No matter where we are right now, if we're at the absolute highest level that a human being can go, there's more. There'll always be more. See, this is what's beautiful about immortality, about infinity, about expanding forever and ever and ever. Our concept and our experience of God is going to be expanding forever. Expanding forever. So Dr. Holmes asked us to consider an artist, and I'm going to use a painter as an example. The painter sits down and the painter takes out brushes and pencils and palettes and all of the tools of the trade. And something beautiful appears on the canvas, something beautiful. Now, how is it, that this blank canvas with a little bit of paint and things like that suddenly evokes this feeling of beauty within us? We look at that and say, oh, that's beautiful, that's beautiful. And Dr. Holmes asks us to consider that the painter is somehow in touch with the essence of beauty. There's a feeling within the artist. There is a sense, an awareness of beauty. And it is from that sense of beauty, from that awareness of beauty, from experiencing the presence of beauty, that the beauty expresses through them as a painting. As a painting that others can look upon and also, to some degree, experience beauty. Now, we wouldn't say that the painter can make beautiful paintings because they are beautiful. We wouldn't say that they are beauty itself, but we would say that there is an awareness, a consciousness of beauty. Not an intellectual technique, but an actual experience of the beautiful. To give you an example, Lori was watching Bob Ross when we had satellite years ago, and Bob Ross videos were on. And there was a segment that he did where somebody had sent in a little picture and a video clip. It was a little boy about 5 years old who had been watching Bob Ross, and he learned how to make one of the paintings that Bob Ross did on the show. And it was typical Bob Ross. It had a mountain, and it had a pond, and it had trees, and happy little birds, and squirrels, and all those kind of things. And this little boy mimicked what Bob Ross did with a great degree of accuracy. So they had this little short video of him, and he had a blank canvas, and whatever Bob Ross said to do, this little boy did. And when he was done, he had a painting that looked pretty good. Now, the little boy had technique. he had the technique for that one painting down. See? He could take a blank piece of canvas and he could remember what he did, and he could do that one painting. But that doesn't mean that he was really in touch with the essence or the presence of beauty within. He may have been, I don't know. But the point I'm trying to make is there's a difference between technique and experience. Technique and experience. And it's the same with spirituality. Emma Curtis Hopkins tells us that, at times human beings would observe other human beings as they started to develop spiritually. For lack of a better word, we'll say develop. They were becoming more and more aware of what spirituality is, and more aware of this presence within them, this presence of love, this presence of God, this presence of oneness, right? So spirituality is us becoming aware of consciousness itself, becoming aware of the presence, practicing the presence, experiencing the presence, being at home with the beloved. All these different ways that we are told. So our spirituality is about having that experience of the presence. And what Emma Curtis Hopkins tells us is people would observe others, and as they started to have this experience, deeper and deeper degrees of this experience, their habits might change. They might change the way they eat. They might change the way that they spoke. They might change the way that they dressed. All of these things. And people who were looking at technique would look at that and say, oh, so if we eat what they eat, and if we dress the way that they dress, if we do the technique, if we do the things that these spiritual people are doing, we will be spiritual beings. And of course, that's not the case. It'll be the same people they were before. They'll just be doing different things. So sometimes what has happened is that into our religions we have had some techniques and some rituals and things like that we wind up doing. But if we lose sight of the fact that doing them is for the purpose of facilitating the experience, and then allowing the experience to dictate what we're doing, if we lose sight of that, then we're just doing for the sake of doing. It's another misdirection. It keeps us busy. So what it is that we are looking for is we are looking to have this experience of love, of unity, of oneness, the experience of the presence of God in us, as us, through us, around us. That is what we wish. And now we have to ask ourselves, well, where are we going to have that experience? And this is why I think we come to the conclusion we may have been looking in all the wrong places, in all the wrong places. This presence, this experience of the divine is not something of the ego, nor is it something of the intellect. God is not a mathematical problem to be solved. God is not a puzzle to be figured out. Osho says philosophy just loves to ask unanswerable questions, but we're not interested in asking unanswerable questions. We are interested in the experience. The Sufis have a beautiful saying, I do not wish to be the honey, I wish to taste its sweetness. I wish to taste its sweetness. We don't want to know the chemical formula of honey. We don't want to know the composition of the different types of pollens that the bees gather to make the honey. We don't want to know the particular species of the bees that made the honey. We want to taste its sweetness. So one of the distractions that we have, of course, is the world itself and the intellect and our interacting. And like the little guy in the grocery cart, we keep looking at the world out there and we want to know more and more and more and more and more about it. And that's necessary for a part of our development, and it's good for a part of our development, but there comes a time when we have to say, I don't need to know anymore, I don't want to know anymore, because all of that is going away. All of that is changing. It is changing, you know. I look back at my years in technology, and almost everything that I worked on in the 70s, in the 80s, and in the 90s, almost every bit of technology that I have worked on is now obsolete. It's gone. It's been replaced. It was good for the time. It did what it was supposed to do, but there's something better now. There's something better. So I don't need to be identified with the past. I don't need to be identified with the world. I need to focus on that which is most important, which is discovering this presence within. So in order to do that, so assuming we've decided, yes, what we're looking for is love. We're looking for the experience of the presence of God, which is perfect love. And the only place we will find that is within, see, because it is not something that you can manufacture. It is not something that you can invent. It's not something that reading a book is going to give us the experience. It can point us in the direction. It can give us some techniques that might help us. But the only place we will ever experience that is within. And this is why the different teachings tell us to go into the silence, to be still and know, to close the door on our prayer closet, and to go in secret, and meet the presence that is already there. Now, there's a myth that comes to us from the East that says that when the gods were creating human beings, they had this great secret that they didn't want the human beings to discover. Because if the human beings did, they might discover that they too were gods. And they didn't know where to hide this. Where were they going to put this that humans wouldn't find it? And one of them said, well, let's put it up on the top of the highest mountain. And they said, no. Eventually, the curiosity of the human being, they're going to go up there and look. And another one says, well, let's put it in the deepest part of the ocean. And he said, well, no, we can't put it down there because eventually their curiosity is going to cause them to go there and look. And the third one said, I have an idea. Let's put it inside them. They're not likely to look there. See, all of our senses point outward. Our ears point outward. Our eyes point outward. Our skin touches the world at 360 degrees around us. All of our senses point outward, but they bring the information within. Within. What is it within? What is it within that processes that information? And that is our consciousness. And we have to come to realize that our consciousness is beyond the ego. Our consciousness is beyond the intellect. So it is as if ego and intellect are a mirror, and our consciousness is looking into the mirror and sees us. So because your senses point out, the only way you can see yourself is if you stand in front of a mirror, physically. If you want to see behind you, you've got to get two mirrors and put them opposite one another so you can see all around you, like the dressing rooms in the clothing stores. You know, they've got mirrors at different angles so you can see how the garment fits you from all sides. And what we need is we need a way to move back beyond the intellect and beyond the ego and observe them because they are the mirrors, but yet to experience that awareness, that consciousness that just is. Osho says that when we finally arrive at the silence, the ego is not there. The ego has stopped to function. Now before that, the ego is like this little child in the grocery cart asking, what's this? What's that? What about this? What about that? And of course, the technology that we've developed as a society reflects that. You know, everybody, we have instant gratification and we have our cell phones and we can look up anything at any moment in time. Who was it that was in that movie? Oh, we can just search for that. We can find that. And we have all of these misdirections, all of these things that are taking us away from. So what we must do is we must first develop the desire, the burning flame, the desire to know the presence. Napoleon Hill tells us that desire is the starting point of all achievement. We've got to want it. We've got to want it more than we want the gadgets of the world, more than we want the distractions of the world, excuse me, more than we want the ego satisfactions of the world. And then we must find a way to enter the silence. And Dr. Holmes wrote a wonderful essay on this, what we mean by entering the silence. The silence is not the absence of everything, because if it was, there would be nothing there to be aware of the silence. It would be like unconsciousness. It is a state of being in which we are more aware, perfectly aware, but without the distractions, without the disturbance. So I love the visual of, you can imagine a storm on the surface of the ocean, and you're in a boat and you're on the surface of the ocean and you're bobbing up and down and up and down. And it's a pretty tough time walking and a pretty tough time standing and not feeling so well, you know, all of these things. But it's a submarine, so all you have to do is take it down below the surface, you see. Now once you just get a little bit below the surface, the waters are calm. The surface disturbance is still there. You are unaffected by it. This is what the meditation practice is about. This is what going within is all about. This is what being still is all about. This is what entering the silence is all about, is we must take that time to find our way to simply be. To simply be. To separate ourselves from the constant questions of the intellect trying to misdirect us. To separate us from the ego, which is trying to protect us and seeking satisfaction. And we must just learn to observe those things undisturbed, undisturbed. To be still and to know. So one simple thing that we can do to help ourselves is to be aware. Mindfulness meditation, to be aware. Osho asks us, when you think about your body, if I ask you to define your body, would you include the sun? Would you include the air? And most of us would not. We would say, well, that's out there. My body's right here. He said, but your body is sunlight. Your body is air. Your body is water. Without those things, your body would cease to be. They must be a part of your body, but we are never thinking of them. We take them for granted. This is why breath as a meditation is called the bridge to the universe. If we can get ourselves to be aware of the fact that breath is occurring, see, then we can be aware of there's a presence observing. There's a presence aware. We can move beyond the ego I. As long as there's an I involved, and by I mean an identification of me separate from and apart, then we've got work to do. Right? So the Sufi tale is of the man who dies and goes to heaven, and he knocks at the door of heaven. And God says, "Who is it?" And he says, "It is I, your servant, Jim." God says, "I'm sorry, heaven is full, have no room." And a while later, the guy knocks again. God says, "Who is it?" And he says, "It is I, your servant, Jim, I'm waiting." God says, "I'm sorry, heaven is full." Finally, the guy gets it and he knocks on the door. And God said, "Who is it?" And he says, "It is thee." And God said, "Come in." See, there was never room for two of us. Our development in the area of our spiritual nature then is in losing this sense of I as a separate entity apart from, different than one another, than life itself, than God itself. So in our practice, in our meditation practice, in our awareness practice during the day, we can constantly remind ourselves, breath is occurring, life is occurring, life is. And Osho gives us another technique that sounds simple, but he says you have to do it for like 3 months. But I'll just tell you what it is so you'll have it in your toolbox. He says that during the day when you breathe, exhale deliberately, consciously. Exhale and exhale deeply. Be aware of the fact that you're exhaling. But then take no thought about inhaling. Let inhaling take care of itself. And as we do that, see, we become, one, aware of our breath, our connection with all of life, our connection with the trees, our connection with the planet. But we become aware of the fact that there is a knower within us that knows what to do if we will let it. This is why our opening treatment was for divine guidance. There is a knower within each and every one of us that knows that we're looking for love, and that knows the right places to look for love, which are within, and knows the techniques that are appropriate for us to have that experience. And then as we have that experience, that changes us. That changes our consciousness. That leads us to a deeper knowing. Not something we have to work out through logic and reason, not something we have to read in a book, but a deeper knowing. A deeper knowing of what we ought to be in order to love more deeply. Divine love has created each and every one of us out of itself and left us alone to make the discovery. So that as we come back to it, we do so in a unique and personalized way. Let's not be fooled by all of the things that the world tells us we need to do. Satisfy the ego by buying an expensive car, those sorts of things. And let's take some time to be at home with the beloved, for that is what we are truly looking for. And so it is.